I was reflecting on that and thinking, okay, well, I feel like I'm getting something of benefit here, and I want to offer something of value in return. And it's interesting that ayahuasca, the experience itself, often feels like a gift. In fact, the word daime in Santo Daime is derived from the Portuguese term give me. So I'm both getting something of value from the plant itself and getting something of value from the people who are providing the ceremonial context in which I'm using it. And what can I offer in return? I was reflecting, the problem isn't the reciprocity. It seems to me that the problem is that the only universal medium of exchange in the modern world is money. And so I started doing some research on the history of money. And I was drawn to, well, I'm going to go into the idea of cognitive tools now, and I'll come back to the question of money. So as I wanted to talk both about ayahuasca as a global commodity and as a cognitive tool. And I just want to acknowledge that the term cognitive tool I use as a heuristic device to sort of think about how ayahuasca can help explain the value of learning, the non-medical benefits potentially, the kinds of cognitive benefits for the better than well approach that Bob Jesse talked about on Friday morning. So the cognitive tool concepts I have learned about through the Soviet psychologist Lev Vygotsky, who developed what he called an extended theory of mind. Cognitive tool use has an important effect on the internal and functional relationships within the human brain. Vygotsky's concept of cognitive tools suggests that not only our minds, but also our brains and our neural architectures are shaped by our uses of tools. So examples of cognitive tools that he used primordially was literacy, numeracy, maps, mnemonic techniques, and then also scientific instruments, the abacus, computers, the internet, and I would submit also psychoactive substances. And the idea of the tool is really illustrated well by thinking of a knife. In the hands of a skilled surgeon or a master chef, a knife can create miracles, but in the hands of a child who thinks it's a toy, it can be potentially dangerous. And I think the same thing could be said of something like ayahuasca. So cognitive tools are a means of symbolic and or cultural mediation between the mind and our world. And so I would argue that certain forms of knowledge or understanding may be predicated on our facility with particular kinds of cognitive tools. So this invokes concepts of epistemology and alternate ways of knowing. So it may be that ayahuasca and other entheogens are tools for empirical investigation of consciousness, but also perhaps ecology and a relationship with our surroundings. So I'm just going to go through a brief evolution of cognitive tools that I think are important to understanding our current economic situation and what ayahuasca might be able to teach us about it. So Vygotsky argued that literacy and numeracy were primordial cognitive tools, but I think more importantly even as seeds. The advent of agriculture shifted human cognition with respect to time, the future, and nature. It also fundamentally transformed social organization, power, and economics. So the domestication of plants and animals that happened around 10,000 BCE shifted us from hunter-gatherers to proto-urbanization. It set up the first hierarchical societies where new kinds of people came into existence who weren't involved in the direct production of or acquisition of food, so groups like priests and bureaucrats. It's notable to note that the words culture and cultivate have a common etymological origin. And it would also invoke the alienation of humans from environment or nature, and it was in the inauguration of private property and debt. And debt's an interesting concept in relation to a monetary system as I'm going to get to. Numeracy and literacy, reading and writing, are not natural to human beings like our oral language or spoken language, but must be taught as a kind of technological innovation. And it's only been around for about 5,000 years. But they were a revolutionary cognitive tool, and as I say, it does help shape our neural architecture. Compare a literate brain to a non-literate brain. There's actual neural architectural differences. Predating numeracy were tally sticks, which were early forms of tracking debt. As I say, I want to get back to that concept. And then sort of building a layers of cognitive tools upon others. So the next innovation that I think is really important is the introduction of the Arabic numerals 0 through 9, which were invented in India around 600 AD, but introduced to Europe in the late Middle Ages, replacing Roman numerals. And this allowed for new forms of arithmetic, mathematics, things like algebra, calculus, statistics, and accounting became possible. They really weren't done prior to that. Basic pebble counters or the abacus was used and then written down in Roman numerals. But the 0 through 9 decimal system created the possibility of double entry bookkeeping, which was another critical innovation as a kind of cognitive tool. Invented in Venice in the 15th century, it allowed for economic transactions to be simultaneously represented as credit and as debt. It revolutionized commercial activity as well as natural philosophy, which was implicated in the creation of the epistemic unit of the modern fact. There's one of my references down here talks about the importance of double entry bookkeeping as an epistemological revolution that was sort of the advent of modern science. So it's ultimately led to the macroeconomic measures of gross domestic product to account for economic health. It's also led ultimately to major accounting scandals such as Enron, WorldCom, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and MF Global. The scientific method took the concept of natural philosophy, as it was originally called, applying a clockwork or mechanistic model of the universe. It allowed us the illusion of human control over the natural world. Its application in medicine has resulted in mortality control, and only much later in birth control, which has led to an explosion in the human population that many would say has already exceeded the carrying capacity of the Earth. Its application in geochemistry has resulted in rapid exploitation of petroleum energy and resources in the 20th century. The past 150 years or so, our economic system has been predicated on cheap energy inputs through petroleum resources. And its application in economics has resulted in so-called risk management through complex financial engineering formulas, things like collateralized debt obligations, credit default swaps, and the like. So today, virtually all money, this is what was astounding to me when I started doing the research into the history of money. It's not the concept of money in and of itself, it's the form of money that we all take for granted. I used to believe that the pieces of paper that I carried around in my pocket were symbols of value, but nothing could actually be further from the truth. Most money that is in existence in the world today never gets put into paper and coins. It's zeros and ones, binary bits, but originally was sort of the double entry bookkeeping ledger system, where new money is created by private banks by conjuring it into existence in the form of loans. What is created is only the principal. It's the fractional reserve lending concept. And the obligatory interest that has to be paid on it comes back out of the same pool, which ultimately is a flawed system. It can't be sustained. Default and foreclosure are inevitably part of the system, and it allows for the trickle up that we see. It results in a growing inequitable distribution of wealth between the poor and the rich. And arguably the biggest gap in that distribution is not between the poor and the rich, but between the rich and the super rich, between the super rich and the super duper rich. That's where the biggest wealth discrepancies are arising today. And the mathematics of compounding interest creates a need for exponential economic growth. So just showing an exponential curve on the credit market debt of the United States over the last 50 years or so. It's kind of flat.